Okay, welcome to episode 10 of Unsung Heroes of the Cloud. Today we've got Kendall Roden talking about the Bot Framework Composer, and I'll get out of your way and turn it over to you all to talk about tech.
Cool.
Hey.
Thanks for the introduction, Matt. How are you doing, Mike? How are you, Kendall?
Happy to be back. I mean, it's like, what? Too long for a holiday, Nils? I mean, you did well during the other two sessions, but I'm very happy to be back here.
I'm glad to have you back as well, Mike. It's not the same without you.
Yeah, it's kind of lonely.
Yeah. But we've got a special guest here today. We've got Kendall Roden from the Azure podcast.
Hey, what's up? Yeah, how's everybody doing? How's everyone doing? I will say, funny story. I've never had this happen. I've had it happen a couple times on internal calls, but I did join a customer call maybe last week, and they didn't even do introduction, so the call just got kicked off. And then eventually, maybe 5 minutes in, I was going to go to introduce myself, and the customer said, "Oh, I've watched your YouTube channel. I've seen some of your videos. I watched your AKS." I think we did an AKS series with Matt. And so it was really funny. I've never actually gotten that before. I've gotten it from the Azure podcast, but it is good to know that people are watching my content. I'm sure you'll feel the same when someone's like, hey, we came across this video. It was helpful. It's always good.
Yes, I feel exactly the same way. But I did want to say, do you remember, Kendall, the three of us were once in the same room?
I think multiple times we have been, probably.
Yeah,
right?
you even have incriminating photos of me during that me and 1D, and I wasn't even proposing to somebody; I was just helping somebody. Yep. You even tweeted about that.
Yep, good times. I miss the days of being in person. It really has been. I think the past month or so, I think I've realized how disconnected I was feeling. I don't even think I recognized it until things are getting busy with the new fiscal year at Microsoft, and I've just realized, oh man, I haven't connected with as many people this year. I haven't been as intentional. So I'm setting up a lot of syncs. My calendar's really busy, just trying to catch up and network a little bit more. It's been different in the remote environment for sure.
Yeah, it definitely has been. But Kendall, what do you like to do for fun before we jump into tech?
Yeah, good question. So I actually discovered cycling, indoor spin classes during the pandemic. So I've always enjoyed exercise, but right before things, I guess right after things reopened in Texas, I started going to a cycle studio. And then in January, one of the leader of the studio reached out and asked if I'd be interested in trying out to teach. So that's been a totally new experience. I've been teaching since around February. I teach 3 to 4 classes a week. So in between, that and work and just other hobbies, spending time with my family and friends, it's definitely been busy, but I love it. It's so fun to be able to get off the computer at the end of the day and go motivate people to get active, and it's very competitive, and we have all the telemetry coming off the bikes, which gets me really excited. So that's been fun, and I'm certainly looking forward to some college football here soon. So making plans to go to a couple games if all stays open and continues to happen. So
cool.
Not playing yourself, just joining in on the game, not playing yourself.
Yeah, they don't want me down there, the defense. I'm scary.
Yeah. I can imagine.
I have one question for you as a spinning instructor. Do you go as all out as the people in the class, and are you as tired at the end of the class?
Oh yeah, I think anybody that takes my cycle class can attest. That's one of the things that I struggle with the most is you're balancing. I'm doing all the lights, so I'm operating lights behind my back that are not labeled or anything. So I'm doing all the lights. I'm doing all of the music, the programming. I'm basically dictating everything to the class, and then I'm also writing, and I always go too hard. So sometimes I have to take a breath myself. I realize I haven't had any water. I have to stop and debug. So yeah, I think it's always hard going from being a writer and then actually teaching and realizing, hey, it's not just about me getting in my best workout, but I think I typically motivate people when I get up there and I'm really energized. So at least I hope they keep coming back, at least for now.
Sounds very much like fun. I'm a runner myself, but I could imagine a cycling class taught by you must be tons of fun.
I like to think it is.
Okay, so back to tech. What have you got for us today as your unsung hero of the cloud?
Yeah. Thanks again, both of you, for reaching out and giving me the opportunity. I always love doing things like this. And when you first asked, Niels, what I wanted to cover, my mind went to things that I do more in my day-to-day, job, right? So I cover a lot around Kubernetes. We have a lot of conversations around the new open source project, Dapper, which you can learn more about at dapper.io. So I thought maybe those would be fun. But then I also thought, hey, maybe this is an opportunity to re-engage with some of the technologies that I always loved, but felt like they had a lot of growing to do. And at the pace that Azure is growing, a lot of these services that I worked with, back in my consulting days, have now progressed exponentially since then. And so one of those offerings is Bot Framework. Just in general, the entire ecosystem around building bots on Azure. So I will say it's a bit convoluted, like maybe Bot Framework's overloaded because there are a lot of different components, right? There's the SDK, there's bot channels you can integrate with to actually interact with the bot. And so I don't want to, simplify Bot Framework too much, but there's a new tool that was created, and I want to say new, but it's not that new. I think it's been out for probably around 2 years. Don't quote me on that, but it's been around for a little bit. But they just came out with the new version at Build, I believe, and it's essentially a user interface that developers can use to build bots instead of just going SDK first. And so I remember I did a bot POC as one of my first forays into customer work at Microsoft. This is like 5 years ago. And I had no idea what I was doing, which is usually where I start things. I like to think I can learn quick, but it was just not intuitive for me personally to build conversational UI by using traditional C# classes in the SDK. Not to say it wasn't a great technology or powerful, but to build the dialogue, to build the user interaction flows, it just wasn't as intuitive without having a way to visualize that. And so I think that this is a huge success just in terms of what it provides and all of the Azure integrations that it services up. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today is the bot framework composer, and more specifically, I believe it's version 2 is the new version, or what they're calling the new version that was released.
Yeah, I'll echo some of your feedback about building bots in C#. I remember I forayed into this about, I think it must have been 4 years ago with a customer, and there's some free online platforms that already had a composer, and we had just a C#. And I think it is easy to build a hello bot in C#, but once you need to build like a complicated structure around what the bot has to say when and how the interactions should go, it's way easier doing that using a visual composer. So I'm very excited to see what you've got for us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just want to echo and emphasize that. And I will say, just for any of you who are unfamiliar, it does generate like a C# solution on the back end, or I believe Node.js is the other language they're available in. But yeah, so you can still extend the bot, you can still bring it into Visual Studio, but your primary, I guess, dialogue composer, or where you're actually going to be authoring the bot, can happen in the composer tool, which I think is neat.
Okay, take it away, I would say.
Just jump right in. Okay, awesome. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And for the sake of today's demo, I just want to go ahead and caveat a couple of things, which I think are important and just want to level set. So I'm not an expert in this. And I like to say that just because there's always stuff that you can learn. And frankly, this isn't something I do all the time. So I'm pretty familiar with everything I'm going to cover today, but there may be some realms or questions that I'm not able to answer as deeply as I would like. So I just want to caveat that. But I feel pretty confident. I think I might be underselling myself just a little bit. And then the second thing is I've built a bot that is not enterprise ready, right? There are some considerations, best practices I haven't implemented for the sake of the demo, just because it is a demo. So I just want to make sure that everybody has that framework in mind, so that as you're using this potentially as a Kickstarter for your experience, that you can add in some add-ins that I don't have. And I'll call out some of those as well. And hopefully today I can also cover a little bit around some of the gotchas that I experienced when working with the bot composer. So in my demo quest to build this out, there were some things that I realized either aren't there, or maybe some mismatches in the documentation, or just little things that you might say, hey, why does this work this way? Or how could we do a workaround here? So hopefully I'll be able to call those out, and feel free to ask as we go through. So first and foremost, let's just take a look at the actual user interface. So I can download the Bot Framework Composer via like basically as a desktop application for Mac and Windows. And then also what's really cool is if for whatever reason you don't want to use the desktop application, which really is the preferred approach, you can actually self-host the binaries and compile them and use like an Azure VM and essentially connect to them remotely. So it is neat to be able to host the development environment external from the developer workstation. But I would say, I think from a best practices perspective, it definitely makes sense to host it on the local machine. So this is basically what you'll see whenever you download the desktop application and get it running. And what's really cool here is when you're thinking about Bot Framework in general, traditionally you would have to obviously set up your Visual Studio environment with the Bot Framework SDK, but also you'd have to download the bot emulator. And what's neat about the new release of the Bot Framework Composer is that it actually integrates web chat directly. So you don't have to go into the emulator in order to actually see logs and play around with the bot. So I think that's really great because it consolidates the development experience. So that's something to keep in mind. So I have several bot projects here, and I will say there's a great samples repo that's been created specifically for getting started with Bot Framework Composer. And you can also do migration of SDK first bots into Bot Framework Composer. There's documentation on that as well. I will say one thing that's a caveat as well that I've seen recently is that obviously Bot Framework v3 to v4 SDK, this happened a while ago where we started supporting v4 and we made that move. It's been a while now, but the migration process I think has some caveats. So there's also documentation if you're working with a bot v3 SDK, but I'll also show you another way that you can make use of v3 bots and integrate them into v4 SDK or Bot Framework Composer centric bots.
So you said you can do code first management of bots here too. You mentioned earlier that you can export them as C#. Maybe I'm running ahead a little bit on your demo, but if you change anything in the code, does it reflect back into the composer too?
It should. From my understanding, it should. Any like extensions that you do in Visual Studio, and that's the same goes with like basically behind the scenes. This is generating all of your like language understanding. Language generation modules, like all these things are getting created on the back end in your file system in order for you to basically be able to export these. So like that's another great thing. You can actually export all of the templates that you're creating via Bot Composer and share them with your people on your team to reuse them. So lots of reusable assets getting created. So I can actually show you here. Let's take a look at this. Just give me 1 second. And I am getting a bit of background noise. I'm not sure if that's coming from you, Mike, or from you, Niels, but I just wanted to let you know. Okay, cool. So let's take a look here. So I have let me click in here. Perfect. So if you're looking at my file system, the back end of this bot framework, or excuse me, this bot composer project, you can see here it's actually creating like a CS proj in C#. So I can actually tell it which language I want it to generate. And then you can see here I have things like dialogues, and each of my dialogues here has associated generated files for either the knowledge base using QAMaker or the language generation or language recognition. So all this is getting created for you. It has a startup.cs, a www root, so all the things you would expect in a normal C# project. So that's what's getting created for you on the back end. So this is a project we're going to demo, but I just wanted to show you we actually have hooked up templates so that you can start from a template here, right? You don't have to start from scratch. So if you're new to Bot Framework Composer, you get these templates you can start with there. We've got the node ones, a little bit less options there. But I basically started with a sample that's out on GitHub, so I didn't start from one of these, but these are really great just to play around, and it'll actually tell you which resources you need to provision in order to actually go and deploy this and make it work with the bot service itself running in Azure. So that, and it's really crazy because a lot of these updates are actually recent. So even though I haven't played around with it in several years, to be honest, until maybe the past 2 or 3 weeks when I got asked to highlight this or highlight an unsung hero, I will say a lot of these have come out even since like February, March. Templates weren't really around for like even beyond the past 5 or 6 months. So just keep that in mind. There's a great document that kind of goes through all the different updates. So I'll stop talking. I'm being very verbose, but hopefully it's helpful. And now we're actually going
That's
to
what
look
you're
at
here for.
Okay, perfect. Okay, good. I've never had a problem with not being able to talk enough. So, blessing and a curse. So I want to kind of go over the UI and what you're actually visualizing here. So this is our authoring canvas. So this is essentially where we're going to build out our workflows. If you're familiar with Logic Apps, which I'll actually show you an integration with Logic Apps via an HTTP request that we'll send from our bot, it's similar to that, right? It kind of gives off that vibe a little bit with creating a workflow, but in this case, our workflow is really based on conversational dialogues. So underneath or within our authoring canvas, this is where we can add actions. So each one of these will be considered an action in the authoring plane. I have dialogues here. So I have a root dialogue, which is basically the dialogue where I'm going to kick off all of the user interaction. And then I have child dialogues that I can essentially call out to from the parent dialogue. So each one of these represents a dialogue. I can add dialogues here. So I can add a dialogue. And you'll also see things like I can, start the bot from here, or I can even add a bot. So I can add a second bot if I wanted to create a bot with, different functionality. And then we'll see connect to a skill. So what does that actually mean? Well, this is where the V3 framework bit comes into a little bit, right? The bot framework SDK V3. If you have an old bot and you don't really want to modify it or migrate it, what you could do is actually add it as a skill to a V4 bot. Was there a question there, Niels? Okay, I want to make sure I'm breathing. So if y'all have any questions, y'all are on this side of my screen.
I was just thinking that it's very neat that you don't have to migrate your bots, so you can just integrate them. So that's cool.
Yeah. And I will say, like, if it's a core line of business bot that you're constantly iterating on and you really need to be able to change the functionality, then yeah, maybe migrating makes sense. But if not, you could potentially use it as a skill. And so what skills are is essentially bots that you create and then you call out to. So it would almost be like creating an Azure function that you can then call out to execute a certain functionality and then send it back to the parent. And that's essentially what's happening here. So in this case, the skill could actually be deployed in Azure to another web app or to an Azure function where it's being hosted. And then I can essentially just call out to that skill. That skill can handle the user intent. And then it can essentially send back control to the root bot. So that's what skills allow you to do. And then within each dialogue, we have a series of triggers. So the trigger is essentially going to be the first thing that kicks off a specific dialogue or something that actually triggers that dialogue to take place. So there's several different types of triggers that we can add in a bot. So I'll just go ahead and show you those. So within a dialogue, there's several different triggers. So one of them is intent recognized. So this is basically using Lewis, which is that language understanding service that we have to say, hey, based on the user input that I'm getting and the language understanding modules that I've created, what do I think the user is trying to accomplish? What dialogue do I think is best fit to handle this particular user intent? Then I also have a QA intent recognized. So if you're unfamiliar, there's something called the QAMaker service. And what that can essentially do is you can create question and answer or like FAQ style I guess it would be a cognitive service. It is considered a cognitive service. But like, let's say you have some FAQ documentation or you have even unstructured, which I'll explain here in a second, the caveats there. I can create a knowledge base. And then based on the user intent, I can say, hey, let's send this question or this intent over to the knowledge base, see if there's any related insights that we can send back to the user. So that would be a Q&A intent. And then there's several others, right? One is unknown. So like, hey, I don't even know what this user is trying to do. How should I handle this? And then a few others, right? Like activities. So for example, an activity can be something like, hey, a conversation update, right? A new user joins the chat or someone I've never interacted with is now working with the bot. I could even say, hey, I want to hand this off, right? User is pissed. Sorry, that might be like pissed, mad, whatever is acceptable to say. But user is upset here. So because of that, we're actually going to escalate and hand off to a person who can then handle that. And so there's a lot of different activities we can handle. And then we also have custom events, or maybe we actually had a duplicated intent. So we saw, hey, it might be a good fit for this, might be a good fit for that. So I'm going to focus more on what we've already created, but that at least now gives you a good flavor of what some of these intents are. So here I've set up I've set up a greeting intent. I've set up a Q&A intent. I've set up an unknown one to handle if I don't know what the user is asking. And then I have a few things here that are going to actually kick off different dialogues based on the initial intent that I got. So I'm going to show you a couple more things, and then we'll kick off the bot and actually see it in action. So what else do we have here in kind of the menus pane or the navigation pane? So one is configuration settings. So this is where we can actually add things like our Lewis model. So if we actually went out and created a Lewis resource, this is where we can get an authoring key. So we can actually author our Lewis models directly in Composer. So traditionally, we would go out to like lewis.ai and we'd actually add all of our intents and utterances and entities there, or we would use it programmatically via the API. But we can do that and author it within this portal. So we don't have to switch back and forth between lewis.ai and Composer. Instead, I can just add to my Lewis AI model, and that will be synced up to the Lewis AI in the portal. And then I'm connecting a QAMaker instance. And then I also have my app ID. So this is going to be related to the bot service itself that I've created. So then we have user input. So this is really all related to that Lewis model. So this is how we're actually going to take in This is how we're going to take in user input and then basically have some sample utterances. So how do we actually qualify if this is the intent that we think the user is sending in? So for example, in order to kick off the AKS Best Practices dialog, I'm going to have that an intent called AKS Best Practices. So I'm going to give a couple of example phrases that the user might send me that would actually kick off that intent. So one would be, I have questions around AKS best practices. Maybe that shouldn't be a question mark because that's not a question. What are good practices for AKS? What are ways I can secure it? So on and so forth. And then I have some others here, right? I want to suggest a topic for the AKS office hours. And I'll get into the domain of what my bot is doing in just a second. But you can see here, I'm just sending in some example utterances that will kick off or kind of be examples of what that intent might look like. And then within each of these dialogues, I'm really not getting any user input, which is why I don't have any intents, right? So the user isn't interacting with these dialogues, therefore it wouldn't make sense necessarily to accept any intent from the user. Last walk through before we do the demo. One is going to be bot responses. So using something called language generation templates, I can actually create a very consistent way and a templatized way of actually responding based on the user intent that I get, right? So if the user says, hey, I want best practices around AKS, I then need to be able to respond in some way, right, from the bot. And so this is where I can actually send in some language responses based on these language generation templates. And I'll actually show you where I'm creating these. And once again, this is propagating into those language generation templates that are on the back end of Composer in my file system. So if I wanted to then take this LG template and share it across the team, I could do that.
And Kendall, these language generation templates, those are just snippets of C# code that are a part of the bot. Those are not a cognitive service on itself.
Right. The language generation templates are not part of any API or cognitive service. They're built into the bot framework. So this is, that's a great question. And I'll show you how they're actually, being made use of. And then knowledge base is the last thing I wanted to cover here, which is basically how do we then create a QAMaker service with a knowledge base that has a set of question and answer pairs that I can use whenever I get a Q&A recognized intent. So in this case, I have a knowledge base called AKS Office Hours that's providing some sample questions, and I can actually put multiple phrasings of those questions, and then I can have an answer to that particular question. And this is also going to be making use of like learning and an AI in the back end. So I don't necessarily have to put in the exact utterance, right? It's going to learn, and then from there, I'm going to be able to direct them to the knowledge or the question that makes the most sense, right? It doesn't have to be verbatim question asking. So I have one here that I've hooked up. Now, there is a caveat here that I think is worth calling out. So QAMaker recently as a service, so there's a QAMaker standalone service that's GA. Recently, what they did is they basically created QAMaker managed, and then they integrated that in with the text analytics API. So what that means is if I want to create the most up-to-date version of QAMaker service, what I could do is go to create a text analytics cognitive service and then enable a feature that's basically allowing me to do question and answer. So you can actually enable that on the text analytics API. Composer, from what I've learned, is totally unaware of this change. Now, to be fair, it's in preview, but all of the integration is based on a QAMaker service that you're provisioning via the QAMaker resource. So it's not really aware of this preview change that was made. So I'll show you an example of how I use this, but I had to integrate it via the HTTP endpoint. So I basically am just making a call to an existing text analytics API with that new preview feature enabled, but I can't actually integrate it and like update it and iterate on it the way that I could if I used a traditional QAMaker service. And I assume that will change over time, but that's just something, you know, to keep in mind. And then one thing that's just important to call out, you can actually provision all of the resources that are needed directly from the portal. So I can create a publishing profile. So I can either bring in all of my settings from like the QAMaker service, my bot service, like my channel registration, or I can basically have it go out and provision all of those resources on my behalf, hook them up to my bot that's running locally. So in the Azure portal, it went ahead and provisioned all these for me. And now if I want to do a publish, I can use the publish profile that already exists and essentially publish it here. And so if I wanted to add a new publishing profile, I can give it a name, tell it I want to publish it to Azure, and then essentially say if I want to use existing resources or if I want to provision new ones.
And that's doing it straight from the PC, right? It's not like you can integrate immediately with GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps for that. It's not creating any pipelines.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is a CI/CD GitHub action for this in preview. Like I think that that's something that they have is basically taking this stuff and being able to use a GitHub action. But I don't know how this is happening on the back end. Like I assume that they're doing it through like a pipeline or series of scripts, but I'm not actually sure how they're going about that. It's abstracted away at this point. Okay, awesome. And there's so much I want to cover, so I want to make sure that you're aware of what the UI can do. But I can actually add like NuGet packages to my bot composer bot. So like I could compile some like helper libraries or whatever that I want to use across my organization, compile them into a NuGet package, add that NuGet package. So I think that's really cool. So we get like some built-in adapters that we can make use of. Like you can even see here an adaptive dialogue for greeting new users. So I could add that and then make use of that in the welcome dialogue. So I've added a couple here. One of them is Lewis. We've got QAMaker. So it's basically importing those similar to how you would import the libraries and the packages in C#. So who wants to actually?
It also supports other languages because you mentioned earlier Node was also supported.
I think Node is supported.
I'm reckoning that you can add other packages and too, because I see a drop down with NuGet, so it's not limited to NuGet.
Yeah,
probably.
let's see NuGet and npm.
And npm as I figured. Okay.
Awesome. Do y'all want to see the bot in action? Now that I've talked a little bit. Okay, cool. Okay, so we're gonna see it in action. I'm gonna go ahead and kick off the debugger, and we're just, once again, this isn't gonna be like a perfect conversation flow. One of the things I really skimped on was creating like unhappy path on some of these things. So just keep that in mind. You know, if I went in and did like interruptions, or if I was like really non-compliant and I asked for someone's name and they typed in like R2D2 3C9, it would probably work right now. So we're going to go down the happy path for the sake of just like playing around with the bot composer itself. While this is loading up too, let me show you like an example of what we can, like some of the things we'll see within a dialogue. So if I want to add a new action to a dialogue, here's some of the things I can do, right? I can send a response to the user. I can ask them a question. That question can look different. It can be a multi-choice question. It can be like I'm asking for a number response. I'm asking for a text response. I can create a condition. So I can create if-else statements based on user input, or if I want to take a specific action. I can do loops, and I can do dialogue management, which is really great, right? I can kick off a new dialogue based on user input or intent. I can cancel dialogues. I can even do things like setting properties. So similar to how you would do in Logic apps, or even just creating a new variable in your bot, I can set properties within the bot to maintain and store state. I can access external resources. So this is really interesting, right? I can connect to a skill, which we talked about earlier, kind of another bot that we've created and deployed somewhere else. I can send an HTTP request. I can do an OAuth login. And this is what I was even trying to connect to a knowledge base this way. Essentially what this is like, hey, you can connect to your knowledge base via an action, but you still can't do like the iterative learning and the authoring within the portal. But even that action does not work with the new resource. So instead, I basically had to do an HTTP request, if that makes sense. So let's go ahead and kick this off and see what happens. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to open web chat. So you can see I can test it in the emulator, but right now we've actually got this integrated experience now, so I don't need to do that. This should kick off here unless the demo gods absolutely do not want me to be successful. There we go. We're cooking with gas. All right. So what happened here is the greeting. You see here, conversation update activity. So a new user has joined the chat. Therefore, we're getting a prompt here that says, hey, I'm AKS Helpbot. What's your name? And I should have this on Do Not Disturb. It must have worn off. So let me go ahead and say until tomorrow. Okay, so what's my name? I'm going to go with Kendall. Now, if I had had a conversation with this bot before, it would have persisted my name, and I can show you how you would do that later. If you do restart conversation with new user or with the same user ID. You can see here, user's never been greeted before, so we're kicking off the welcome dialog. That's a child dialog. Here's what we're seeing in the flow, right? If the user has not been greeted, or if this particular variable doesn't exist and hasn't been initialized, then we're going to greet the user. So hey, here we're going to prompt for text. I can actually, using language generation, I can say, hey, I want to respond in one of many ways to the user, depending on, randomized. So they have my name. We've stored that here in a parameter. And then basically I've said the user has been greeted. So if they rejoin the conversation or refresh, I won't re-greet them. So how can the user help? Here I'm using a hero card, which is just one of the ways we can give output. So it says, like, I'm the AKS office hours help bot, essentially. I can ask questions around AKS office hours. I can submit a topic request for an upcoming session if I want to learn something more from one of them, or I can ask about AKS best practices. So this would be a great time for me to demonstrate some of what this bot's doing. So one will be, let's ask about the AKS office hours. So I'm just going to say, what are AKS office hours? I could put AKS office hours. I could put explain AKS office hours. Most likely, because of the language template, it would be able to understand that intent pretty well. So what are AKS office hours? If I click here, we should see a Lewis trace coming in, and we see that a Q&A intent was basically recognized. So if we click in on the QAMaker trace, we should see here, what are AKS office hours? So with a score of 98 or 98% confidence, we have realized that the bot, the bot wanted to send this to the QAMaker intent. Was there a question on that? Okay, perfect. No, so every two. Yeah, awesome. So basically it's telling me, hey, we recognize Q&A intent every 2 weeks. Basically, this is a call that I host. Gonna sit here and tell y'all to join, but essentially this gives some information about it. So maybe I can say, do you record the sessions? Do you record the session? So this should hopefully recognize QAMaker again, based on the language understanding module. And here it says, hey, we've got some meeting recordings, check them out. I could even say, what are some past sessions? Let's say if I did past session. So based on this language understanding, it didn't understand past session. So that's where I would go in and want to probably train the language understanding module a little bit more, because I kind of had an idea of what I was trying to say, but it didn't necessarily recognize that intent. And we could even go in and see, like, hey, based on the trace here, like, did it just not recognize? Let's see, past session. So it actually got the top intent from Lewis was cancel, which didn't have very high confidence. And let's see, here we had, this was, so it just went to Lewis. It didn't even send us to QAMaker in this case. So that's okay. We got the cancel dialog. It's not sure, but at least we know, hey, let's ask for help and remember what it can help us with. So we can click help. That'll kick off the help dialog, which will basically send us, hey, remember, this is how I can help. So that's when we got a Q&A intent recognized, which sent us to the the AKS Best Practices dialogue, or no, I'm sorry, the Q&A intent recognized dialogue. So let's hit the AKS Best Practices one, right? Can you tell me about, and remember, this one is using the not built-in QAMaker. So what I had to do here is basically say, I trained the language understanding module to kind of understand, is it asking for something that seems like an AKS technical question or best practice? If so, we're going to kick off the AKS best practices dialog. And what I'm doing here is basically I'm taking the text that came in via the user, right, the question that they asked, and then I'm putting together an HTTP request that's calling out to the the text analytics with QAMaker enabled that I already have hosted in Azure in a resource group in a text analytics cognitive service. So when I do that, I'm basically taking this, sending it via JSON. I'm getting the response back, deserializing that, and then sending it to the user. So let's say, can you tell me about RBAC in AKS cluster? Let's see if it recognizes. So the Lewis module should recognize this, send it to this particular dialog. We should see an HTTP request if it understood, which we do. And now we're getting the response. Yeah, so
That's cool.
basically, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So this is going to the text analytics API, and I can actually see the confidence level. So I would love to train up the module to have more confidence if this is the right answer, which it looks like it is, right? Control access to resources, awesome. So this is one that I was playing around with right before we started. It may or may not work, let's see. So what I'm doing here is like, can we stay within the same dialogue loop? So if they have another question, instead of kicking them back, can I just keep them here and repeat the same dialogue? So if I say yes, it should work. We don't know, we'll see. Yeah, see, I tried to put validation in there, it didn't work. That's okay, let's see if we can cancel here and send back. Cancel, it's gonna do that loop a couple of times. Yeah, it's not working, that's okay. So let's go to help and see if we can actually kick this out. I'm gonna keep extending this because it's really fun. So we'll go back to how it can help. So this is the one I'm really excited about. And this is another integration with an API call. So one of them is, hey, what if, hey, can I suggest a new AKS office hours topic? So if I say that, see if we get anything from the bot here. Oh, come on. I haven't tested this one this morning. Come on.
Fingers crossed.
Oh no. Okay, we're stuck here. Let's see if we can. I'm going to restart the conversation. Let's look here. So basically, we can do a quick troubleshoot. And I know we're running low on time. I hope that y'all are okay to stick around. So what we can see here is basically what I'm trying to do is I want to suggest a topic. So if we look at the language understanding module, this would be the first thing that I look at, right? Suggest an AKS topic. Let's go to user input. So if I look at I want to submit a topic for the AKS office hours. So it should be getting that, right? If everything's tied up, it should have gotten that one pretty well. So let's see if it may just be like so I just put AM. So I probably should have said, can you confirm that AM is your name? But for now I'm AM. And let's see if we type this verbatim, if it'll register. If not, okay, perfect. So is there an AKS topic that you're interested in hearing more about? So this is a confirmation like, hey, did you really mean to go and submit this? I'll say yes. What's neat is we then use this adaptive card to get information from the user. So I've created an adaptive card. You can go online and actually generate these yourself using this like really cool GUI, and then you can copy them. So how is this actually getting rendered? I'll just show you that really quickly. In bot responses, I made use of this language generation template. So if you click down here, it says AKS topic form, and you can see my adaptive card here. And then I reference, thank you. Yeah. And then I
just a full JSON that you put in there. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. And then when I reference this to render it, what I have to do is I created a, let me see here. Here it is, prompt for text. So what I did is in the bot response, I can put like just plain text, or I can click, hey, I want to add an attachment essentially. So you can see here, text would have been the default, but I've already clicked in and I want to add an attachment. So if I click add new attachment, I can create one from a built-in template. Or what I can do, and I could even start a new adaptive card here, or I can say I'm going to add a custom one, and then I reference that which I already created in the language generation tab. And what I have to specify here is JSON. If I don't do that, it won't render. That was something that I missed in the docs, so just keep that in mind. And if I click show code, I can actually see what it's doing here. So it created this activity, and it's sending in that attachment. That attachment is tied to the language generation template. So, okay, let's actually like go back to
make it easy.
Yeah, there's some cool stuff.
Build a fully interactive interface.
Yeah, this took me like maybe less than 12 hours. And that's with me like teaching myself how to do it as I went to like create all of this. Yeah. So I'm going to put this is really cool. I got excited. So I'm going to put my GitHub handle here. I'm going to put the topic request. So let's say like pod identity v2. And we could say like, it has taken a while to come out of preview.
That's true.
What is the new V2 implementation like? Oh, IDC. Okay. Okay, so when I click submit, this is going to then take the input, serialize it as JSON, or I guess it's just putting it in a JSON object. You don't see the serialization bit. You just kind of send in the JSON payload. And then basically I'm going to wait on a response back. So hopefully we should get a good response. So I click submit. So we see an HTTP post. Thanks for submitting your feedback. The topic was added to a GitHub issue. So if I go over to GitHub, let me flip over here. Thought I had it pulled up already. Yep, I do. Okay, so
we're not seeing GitHub yet.
Yes, I'll pull it over here. So you can see that I was testing this out, so forgive me. So what I want to do is actually, I might even integrate this with the actual AKS office hours repo. So if I go to, let's go here to, I'm going to leave that up too. I'll just show you this really quick. If I go to aka.ms/AKS public office hours. So we're trying to encourage people who join the call to add issues to actually suggest other topics instead of just seeing them on the calls. So I'm going to hook it up to this issues repo, but I was testing and it didn't make that much sense. So instead, if you look here, I can now see that this actually went on my behalf, created the topic proposal, created the topic, and then gave me a topic description. So how did I do this? Well, the HTTP request I made was actually to a Logic app. The Logic app then went and created the issue on my behalf using the payload. So this is a really simple workflow, but when an HTTP request is received, I'm going to create an issue in GitHub. But it's so easy, right? To just like pop it out to Logic apps, integrate it with Azure Functions. Like if there's so many integrated with cognitive services. So that's what's happening there. So, I know we're out of time, so I'll just say, how can we keep in touch? And so if you're interested in keeping in touch, feel free to find me on Twitter, find me on LinkedIn. Thanks for having me. I would love to answer questions now. I know I talked a ton and didn't let y'all answer almost any question or ask any questions. So please feel free to ask questions, but hopefully this was beneficial, useful, and you learned something.
So this was super amazing, Kendall. I have one question for you. When are the next AKS office hours?
Great question. So they will be hosted tomorrow. So they're every other Thursday. Tomorrow we'll be doing one with the product group. So every month and a half or so, we actually bring the AKS product team on to do a roadmap call where they talk about future state, and all the customers that are when is this going to GA can ask those questions. And then also we will be having a cool discussion around one of the features that they're building out right now for auto upgrade. So if you actually want to have input on a legitimate feature in AKS, feel free to come tomorrow. We're gonna discuss that. Please. And also, I know I didn't show a lot of the Azure resources themselves, but obviously I could easily integrate this with Teams. I can integrate it with web chat or Slack, all of that via the Azure portal. So, and once again, when I did this publish, I have all of the Azure resources that are already needed in order to provision and get this up and running. So that's a super easy process. And so, yeah, I just think this is such a neat tool and has so much value add. Once again, there are some gotchas in there, but in general, I thought it was great, this experience playing around with it. And hopefully this will shed some more light on some of the goodness.
It's a real unsung hero. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me so much.
I think you really amazed a lot of people with the simplicity of the tool, actually, because it's really easy to use, and that's indeed what we're looking for at Unsung Hero. So thank you for joining us on that one and for proposing this topic, because actually I never stood still with Composer. So yeah, that's really cool to see how it works and how simple actually that I even understand now how bots work.
Yeah, and hey, I want to do a call out, right? I'm pretty confident in everything that I shared today. I think I got most of it right. If I didn't, and when you're watching this, feel free to drop any comments below if you have other thoughts, feedback. If I misspoke. Once again, as the caveat, I'm not a perfect expert on this, but hopefully, even just showing you my learning journey, over the past couple of weeks putting this together, will show you how easy this is to get up and running. And so, yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's super grateful.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
See y'all soon.
So I think on that
we'll see you all again in about 2 weeks for the next one.
About 2 weeks. All right. Stay safe, everybody, and have a pleasant evening or pleasant day.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.